Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Today's guest is Doug Simpson, end-of-life doula and the Executive Director of INELDA, the International End-of-Life Doula Association. My guest today, Doug Simpson, is the Executive Director of INELDA, an organization whose mission it is to encourage the presence of end-of-life doulas by normalizing death, dying, and grief through conscientious education and stewardship, and by fostering community and advocacy. Doug trained with INELDA as an end-of-life doula in 2018, and it led him eventually to being the executive director in 2022. He collaboratively leads a dynamic team of staff and educators who are committed to ensuring an accessible, equitable, and compassionate death care system. As a doula, Doug has supported family and friends through chronic disease and sudden death. He's got a heart-led approach, which you're going to hear in his stories that he tells, and it's rooted in listening and respecting the autonomy of everyone he supports. He believes in the value of doulas to provide equitable death care, and he's an advocate for doulas as an essential part of the continuum of end-of-life care. Like so many of us end-of-life workers, Doug had a personal experience that led him to become a doula. He and I explore the topic of medical aid in dying and talk about how a doula can assist the patient and family when MAID is being utilized. Doug shares some personal stories that show how his knowledge about death and dying grew through his work at INELDA. He details the missions and the goals of INELDA as part of our conversation, so you'll hear about all the support and resources and courses that they offer. You can find INELDA at their website, enelda.org. It's INELDA.org. So stay with me for this great conversation. There's a lot to learn. Doug, it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Helen.
I'm so excited to talk to you. We talk about doulas and we talk to doulas all the time, but we've never had anybody from INELDA. So I'm glad to have you on the show and to talk everything about end-of-life doulas. We're going to get started with an icebreaker question. I warned you there might be one that I would throw in. So just to get to know you a little bit,
Right.
Because of your work and my work, your icebreaker question is, will you share one of your end-of-life wishes with me and my listeners?
Oh, absolutely. I've got two that came to mind immediately. I am convinced now that I want to be composted. Like when I die, I don't want any chemicals in my body, and I want to be composted. And then whatever is left of me, a nice wheelbarrow of, my being, is then gifted to my family and friends, so then they can certainly plant. My other wish, it's kind of two. I feel like I've already been thinking about my like end of life. Um, I'd love to die where I grew up, which was on a lake. I'd love to be outside as much as I can at that time. And I'd love to have my kids and husband. I don't want to be in the bed with me, like being accompanying me, being with me. But if I could just see the lake as my last breath and feel my family, that would be a dream.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'd want to do the same. I got acquainted with Katrina Spade at Recompose several years ago. Yeah, she was on the show, and I became fascinated with the human composting. And because I live in Texas, you know, the laws are a little slower to change here. So that's not something you can do all over the place. But yeah, I've been really interested in that. I love the idea of just the natural burial, no chemicals, no process involved in changing my body. You know, just
absolutely. And it feels like
yeah.
the continuation of my being in life, right? Because if I can be soil and then something else can grow, it just feels like it's a continuation.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. And then they can take the soil, if that's what you call it, you know,
I don't
because
know, I'm
it's
not
mixed.
sure, right?
Yeah, it's mixed with other organic matter.
Yeah.
So it is soil eventually. And then it gets scattered. I know they use it in some places to reforest areas, or it can be used if your family wants to take it and put it in a garden, things like that. I think that's so cool. It's very personal. Very personal.
Yeah, we did our cat's ashes. It's ashes, it's different, but we put it in our garden, right? 'Cause I felt like being in the garden with all that would be a
Right.
continuation as well. But I'm really
Yeah.
into the recompost,
I
human
like that idea.
composting.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
that was easy.
Yeah, that wasn't too hard, was it? All right, so we're going to jump into your interview with the questions that I sent you,
Okay.
because the work that you do is very interesting. And end of life doulas, I think as a movement, or as a, let's face it, a workforce for those who are seriously ill and dying, it's really grown. And there's a lot of conversation around doulas and their place at the bedside. So what inspired you to work in end-of-life care as a doula? I have to tell you, I don't know a whole lot of male doulas. So I find you to be a little bit of a unicorn. Yeah, it's unusual. So
Thank
how
you.
did you get into this work?
You know, it goes back to my father's death, and his death anniversary was just April 17th, so 9 years. So I'm still reflecting on him recently. I mean, every year some more reflection, but it was really his dying process, and Dr. Anthony Wilson, who was this palliative care doctor, who walked in the room and handed me a card that said palliative care in 2016, and I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
My mom was there. I did the Google. I'm like, okay, I think I know what's going on here. And he spoke to my dad, and he couldn't have been more gracious through the process. He just could not. And I think of his honesty when I remember as my dad, you know, he was diagnosed in February and died in April. It was quick, but he had been in pain for years and we just didn't know. But I remember going to him, it was days before my dad died, and I said, what's happening here? And he said to me, open question back, what do you think's happening to your father? Why do you think your dad lost 28 pounds in the last week? And I'm like, the cancer's eating him. He's like, this is not acknowledgement. I said, okay, we can call the ambulance. I'm bringing him home. And I brought him home, and then I did this care, right? I went into the more of the caregiver, like I give him his meds and do this and this. He went in hospice. So that happened in 16. And when we took my dad out of the house after he had died, there was this quietness. And the only thing I can ever describe it to is how right before it snows, you can hear the quietness of it before a snowstorm. And so I remember sitting in there after I sat in the chair after his next to his hospital bed, and I felt it. Fast forward to 17, we're having our son, and we're doing a home birth. And through the midwifery process, one of the midwives, it was the day we heard our son's heartbeat. When I'm done being with bringing life into this world, I will sit as people exit. And I remember the exact day of my son's heartbeat. My son is born 12:32 on a Saturday. I look out the window and life is going, right? Life is going, but I felt this quietness again. And and I did a lot of, reflecting at that time of the feeling and the noise I felt at my dad's death and my son's birth, and this transitions. I know a lot of people talk about this, but I actually felt it. I actually felt this. And then it wasn't until April of 18, I read a New York Times article about this gentleman that planned his own funeral. It was 2:30 in the morning, couldn't sleep, and read it. And then I started reaching back to the midwives, asking, where did you go for end of life training? And our birth doula, I had no idea, was also a death doula. I had no idea that Jess had done both, and Jess said I went to INELDA. And I took INELDA's training in June of 18. And that started me on this, like a lot of people, feels like a place for me. This feels like a place for me. I reached out to the organization and said, what can I do? I've been in retail my whole life. I've been doing this, I've been doing that, but what can I do? And like, okay, Doug, we'll reach back to you at the end of the year. And I was like, okay. And then I moved on. They reached out in December and said, we've never had a volunteer, but we'll take you in and you can go to work at one of the founders' house. And that's what I did. And it set me on this journey. It set me on this journey. And there's so much that happens afterwards, but that's how I look at my dad's death. I look at some of the things I instinctually did. Being a doula, people have been sitting with people as long as people have been dying, but I played my dad's favorite country music, and just put the pictures of all his kids. And I did some of those things that, we intentionally educate on now that, yeah, we didn't necessarily know from a colleague to do that back then.
But it was instinctive for you. I mean, that's the kind of enriched experience that a doula can help a family create when someone's dying. I love the idea that your midwife was doing the beginnings and the endings. I don't know a whole lot of doulas. Maybe that's fairly commonplace, but I don't know a whole lot of death doulas that are also birth doulas.
It's becoming more common. Even one of our educators started in birth and has moved to death. And then we have another one that started in birth. Yeah, I have two educators in the team that are both experiencing ending. I mean, there's also at times death and birth.
Yes.
And so having that component, and then more of a full spectrum, beginning of life, end of life.
Yeah. Unfortunately, where you're supporting a birth, there is also grief support if there's a death. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. It's amazing. I think your story parallels a lot of doulas and end-of-life workers' stories about how we brush up against it personally, and then we realize this is what I want to do. This is sacred. This is moving. It's incredible, and I want to be part of it. I love it that you started out as a volunteer. That's awesome. Okay, so you're also doing some bigger work nationally. You serve on the board of the American Academy of Medical Aid in Dying, ACAMAID, as they call it. So let's talk about that a little bit. Here on the podcast, we take the stance that we don't endorse medical aid in dying one way or the other. We just want people to be educated, whether you're supporting someone who is terminally ill, or you are someone with a serious illness, or you're a family member. And we know that everybody on the team can take part and support somebody who utilizes MAID. We feel it's really important for people to feel educated and informed about what their options might be, regardless of where they live. I live in Texas. We don't have a medical aid in dying law, a death with dignity law on the books. But as a doula, have you actually companioned someone who utilized medical aid in dying?
I have not personally. My mentor has several times, and even other individuals I know, even on our team, have mentored individuals that have chosen to use medical aid in dying. When I think of the space for doula in this, right? Where does a doula show up in this space? It really, to me, it's no different than any other choice. The choice can be more controversial, right? Or the option they're
Right.
choosing, but it is the dying person's choice. And then how does the dying person navigate to that choice, right? They may have questions, and so having the doula to be able to answer those questions or provide resources, meaning directing them to the ACAMATE has now changed to the Academy in Aid in Dying Medicine, so it's AADM .org. It's been just a recent change in the last month. Um, and more importantly, it's how do you support the circle of care at this, if this choice doesn't resonate with somebody's culture or belief in the family, how can you be present as a doula and listen and provide a space for that conversation? But still, it's the dying person's choice. When I think of the other support doulas can do, it's the end of day, the day they've chosen. How can we create a ritual around this or a practice around this? And just as if somebody was dying with a disease and you're creating your dying plan, what you'd wish, you're going to be alive when this plan is going until you take the medicine, right? And so who do you want there, right? What time of day, the mood, anything they want to create. I think the doula can be there in a very supportive role. One of our colleagues in the organization, her mother chose medical aid in dying and having support. And then in her story, she didn't have support initially, but when she did receive support, she could move back into the daughter role, right? She could move into being with her mother at this time. You could be moving into that versus having to be so orchestrating the actual process, right? And so it does, having a doula in there, I think, is a reminder that this is your loved one circle of care that's chosen this, and how can you have a place in this, and how can the doula support that? I think that's really important because, and even reflecting back on my story with my dad, I became the caregiver versus the son,
Right.
right? And so if somebody chooses medical aid, and here at INELDA too, we believe everybody should have options, right? It's just an option for individuals, and given that choice, and we know where people live or the land they live on, some options are limited and some people have more options. And so as a doula, letting them know what the options are and then allowing them to certainly make the choice.
Absolutely. Well, and in the support that the doula is offering, there's grief support and bereavement support. A lot of doulas continue to follow with families and provide that after a death. And I have read that oftentimes family members of someone who has decided to utilize medical aid in dying, their grief is a little bit different. And sometimes they feel some stigma attached to it, some shame, very similar to suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's died by suicide. And so a doula can provide that extra support. The other thing that strikes me with what you're saying is I think healthcare workers struggle with this end-of-life family member, just being an end-of-life family member and an end-of-life caregiver, and getting rid of that healthcare professional role. Because I know I do. When I go somewhere with my mother's 92 and she has dementia, when I take her to the doctor's office, I really have to dial it back and let her voice be heard, because I want to okay, what medicines is she taking and what's the schedule and what are those interactions? But I think it's really hard for us to step back and just be people. When I've been at the bedside with someone whose family member was a physician or a nurse practitioner, I've had to remind them, this isn't your job now. This is why you have the other people to do this, because being the daughter, the spouse, the son, the brother, that's your job now.
Mm-hmm.
That's your job. And that you can lean into that because you've got the extra support. So with a doula at the bedside, don't you think it makes it easier for us to drop some of that added caregiver burden and just be present for what's happening?
100%. I think some people also lean into it as a way to, anticipatory grief. That's their comfort space. And so
Right.
having conversations even prior to getting to that place allows them really to be present. And, specific with medical aid and dying, you know, I reflect back often about this. My brother never made it to see my father's last words. He was flying in that day, right? So my dad was getting in bad shape and he should fly in. He flew in, they got in. So he missed his last words. And then my dad passed 6 hours later, died. With the medical aid and dying, I've only learned this secondhand or relate back to it is today's the day, right? If I pick July 8th, right? There's planning, and then somebody chooses to say goodbye. It feels like you don't leave a lot of missed opportunities. There almost have to be intentional. You intentionally chose not to say goodbye. You intentionally chose not to reach out. It wasn't like my brother was flying in and this anxiety of like, he didn't make it. And then you live with that, right? I just feel like there's a gift in there somewhere when somebody chooses that to have some potentially different type of closure that wasn't necessarily cut short because of your last breath.
Yeah. And I think as a doula, you've probably gotten that question, should I call the family now? Should I call my kids? Should I call his kids? I know as a hospice nurse, I've had that question. And my answer is always yes.
I would agree.
Yeah, because you can't really be sure of the timing of things. When someone is dying or beginning to show signs of actively dying. And what I always said was, if I'm wrong, you've got extra time.
Agreed.
And if I'm right, then you get to sleep at the end of the day knowing that you connected the family with him before he died.
Agreed. And we get that question a lot in our training. Like,
Really?
it's just I mean, you're only going to die once, right? So if you do, our intention is good, right? Based on what we're seeing the change. And so it's worth the outreach to the circle of care individuals that wanted to be there in the family. And you're 100% agree. And if it wasn't that hour and it was 8 hours later, then they had extra time. But if it wasn't, they had the ability to be there.
Yeah, and people rally. They call it the golden glow.
My dad, ice cream cake 2 days before he died for my sister's birthday. Ice cream cake and lobster. And I was back in New Jersey, and Tracy's like, my sister's like, here's dad with ice cream. Like, I'm coming home tomorrow morning, Friday. And then he died Sunday. It was, and I look at back, back then very little information or knowledge, right? How somebody died. I saw my grandmother at the funeral home, not how she died or process. And so I do think he rallied for my sister and had that ice cream cake and had the lobster. And God bless him.
Yeah. I mean, even with people who are terminally ill, death can be unexpected. Yeah. It's not always predictable.
Yep.
So as a doula, tell me a time when you were moved or inspired by your work at the bedside.
The first thought that came to mind, I had one and then I had two other thoughts, but the first thought is my mother-in-law. It was my mother-in-law who died in 2021. And it was because I'd been with INELDA now. I'd done the training in 2018, been with INELDA all this time. And my mother-in-law's wishes my husband honored and said, she was in surgery. They stopped the surgery and said, we're going to bring her home. So they brought her home on a Sunday. And I had gone over Sunday morning and done what I, knew her hospital bed was going to be here. I was like laying in her other bed, trying to position myself to see what I could do to put she was collected tons of photos and big collages. So I positioned all those. And then she came home and she had a few words. But what I noticed was her change in her breathing, right? The hospice nurse had come and done the evaluation of the intake, and I had noticed what I thought was more of change Stokes. I could see her breathing, changing. And I had told my husband, I think she's beginning to go into active dying. And so this timeline could be this. And I'm like, it's worth calling the hospice nurse. He called the hospice nurse. No, it's impossible. It's impossible. I'm like, okay, so I could be wrong, but, and so the hospice nurse did come and said, okay, she's had a significant, from Sunday to Tuesday, it's a big change. But what it did for me, then I knew I could talk to my husband saying, do you want to spend the night tonight? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do
Yeah.
that? Right. So then he could make those choices that I feel like I didn't have with my dad just going through. And he opted not to. He did this and this. But most importantly, what it provided was for our son to see his grandmother and to go in there and like wave goodbye to her. Her death rattle, as we know, is rather loud, and but he could wave and say goodnight to her. And this was this intersection of like death and life, our son. And the other thing I'll share from a very personal story is we were having our second child, and we had through surrogacy, and it's like you can't celebrate until like this happens and this happens. And then we had gotten the heartbeat on Tuesday. And knowing she was now in active dying, we opted to tell her that she was going to be a grandmother again to a little girl. And so I'll never forget the juxtaposition of her chest rising and the noise and us playing this video we had gotten of her daughter's heartbeat and the juxtaposition there. I carry it with me. I'm sorry, I carry it with me. And then she died Thursday morning. We did this Wednesday afternoon and she died Thursday morning. And so I share the story because I had so much more education in 2021 than I had in 2016, so that I could, at a reference point, to make decisions. And I think that's what I strongly believe inspires me today in the professional part of my job in running ENELDA, the education, right? We can make really good choices because if we hadn't known active dying, okay, we'll go home. It was really important for us to know that she was going to be a grandmother again. We could make those choices. So I still feel inspired, from that really personal experience.
That's perfect. Beautiful, beautiful.
Well,
It's amazing how close birth and death are related. It's striking, isn't it?
it's very striking. And our little daughter, I said to my husband, I said, have you told your mother she ran someplace? And somehow her spirit and parts of her spirit are in our little daughter now. I just
Yeah.
like, it was no surprise that she died on Thursday morning. It just wasn't. It just wasn't. And but that's the inspiration, right? From the knowledge in those moments that I was saying to my husband recently, now we know what your grandmother went through raising your mother.
I love it. The
Yeah.
circle of life.
Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
want to talk more about ENELDA because obviously you're so passionate about the work to the point where you have made this your career and it's part of your mission as an end of life worker. What kind of support does ENELDA, and let's talk about what ENELDA stands for. What kind of support do they provide for doulas, and what are you guys providing for the public?
So INELDA stands for the International End of Life Doula Association. So it's a big name. And when we look at our priorities, right, and our mission is to encourage the presence of end of life doulas, right? And how do we show up and do that? So when I look at the doula journey, right, we have our training, right? That's one piece of what we offer the doula. We offer them now a reiterative process. We've tried to move out of this checklist of somebody's dying, you sum up and plan with them, and then you sit vigil. It's more of a principles of your own self-awareness, the autonomy of the dying process, and how do those inform you? And how do those inform you? So you can keep leaning into those, which is a real shift in our approach and how we show up. So they have that to lean into, but more importantly, individuals come out of our training, and what I learned is that there are a lot of steps from training to sitting bedside or supporting somebody. There are a lot of steps somebody needs to take from coming out of our training and starting their own private practice, coming out of our training and moving on to the certification of somebody decides. And so how do we fill that gap, and how do we walk alongside as we do a dying person? How do we support the doula? And what we now offer is we offer something called a community of practice. And so it's a space to come back, and it's an extension of our training where we do scenarios, and you may be role playing. And so it's an extension of coming back to give you, if you're feeling I'm not yet sure how to make the first step or do something, it's additional spaces. You can come monthly and we can talk about scenarios, and you can be in partnership with other individuals. So there's a continuation of this learning piece. We also offer peer mentoring. So these are individuals, or more, I would say, more experienced doulas that are actually sitting, and they have a real case that they're bringing, and they want some, input from their peers. And what we learned is individuals coming out of training, there was a hesitation to jump into these more experienced doulas because they weren't actually sitting bedside yet. So we created the community of practice. There's definitely the peer mentoring. And what we'll have by the end of the year will be individual mentoring for doulas. We get a lot of requests for like an apprenticeship. Like, how can I potentially talk to Doug 3 or 4 times? How can I talk to a certified doula? So we're looking to connect individuals there. And the other thing we'll launch this year is a reprocessing. As doulas, we see a lot of loss. And it's part of our storytelling. Where can doulas come back and talk about the losses they had this quarter, or their loss, and how it's another supportive self-care for the doula. But then I feel like we round out the doula's journey, right? And we do have an emotional support center that is offered. We have a social worker on our team that can offer emotional support too, if it's more than the reprocessing, or more that need additional support. And so from a doulas, we have this. I think we're really trying to structure out how we support them from the moment they sign up. They're death curious. They want to be a doula. They have been doing this work and didn't know what it was, to come through the training, go through, and experience loss and keep going around. We also offer we have continuing education. We offer a certification program that will be a year-long certification program. Now we've got the webinars. I think that's kind of rounds out our program for the doulas. And when I look at the public outreach and support, right, we have a robust newsletter that comes out monthly about death care. We've got 2 articles in there. We've got self-care in there. We've got resources in there. So that's something that goes out every month, with a breadth of information that goes in there for somebody that's receiving. And I use the word death curious, right? They want to support this better death care or something. So we've got that. We also have our directory, right? Our directory of looking for a doula. Family of public is looking for a doula. Our directory has individuals where you can search by state. You can search. There is for webinars. If you're a member, you get monthly webinars. If you're not a member, it's a very small fee to join these monthly webinars. And we have a membership program, and part of the membership program is community meetups, and so we meet monthly, and so really based around community.
So can we touch back? I want to make sure that we highlight the directory that you guys have for our listeners that are caregivers, that are, as you say, death curious, folks who are having to consider hospice either for themselves or for somebody that they care about, and they're interested in finding a doula. The directory actually lets you search in your area, doesn't it?
Yeah, so you can search. You can do like a radius search. So if you put where you are, it'll give you by radius. You can search by zip code, state, city, and it goes. You can also where our goal is to expand other offerings. People do doulas that do virtual visits, right? You may be interested in a virtual visit versus having somebody come into your space. And then we do each in the directory too. Each doula is giving a little bit to talk about who they are and the services they provide, how they provide them, and what they provide as well. Yeah. And we get a significant amount of, we can look at the websites as analytics, but we get a good amount of individuals coming to that looking. And on our doula directory, it's anybody that's trained with INELDA, so that we know that they've come through our training and they agree to our scope and practice and they understand. So we only have doulas that are trained there. There are other organizations that do any trained doula. So I want to also, because this is a movement, I appreciate our focus on INELDA, but there are other death doula directories that encompass individuals that trained at several organizations, but our focus here is just INELDA.
Right. And so I'm looking at it, and it's really robust because it gives the contact information and website for the doula, but it also talks about any other services. It talks about credentials that they have, because a lot of doulas, a lot of them are massage therapists, or they're also nurses as well. And then it talks about the service area where they will be serving, their community. So you could find one that's in your area. It's very cool. I really like the directory. I think it's a huge, huge asset on your website. So when it comes to working with someone, a client, we say patient in nursing, but for you guys, most of the time it's a client. What's your favorite part of doula work? If you can choose one thing.
Well, the word that comes to my mind is the natural beauty or honesty of the death and what that death brings forward. Right. I mean, this has lived my experience, right? I know some people call a good death a bad death, right? I'm not going there, but I'm focusing on the raw emotions that can be shared, that no longer necessarily have to be like kept secret or not spoken, right? There's a true honesty in that space and you do tend to see a lot of dying individuals sharing emotions or things they haven't shared, right? So there's also a sense of urgency around that. But what's I feel like it's based in honesty, right? This is how I honestly feel, and I want you to know this, right? And you see from Circle of Care also in that moment sharing, right? And so there's the real genuine honesty in that space that I think is untouchable. And in the dying person may not decide to share either, but then they're being honest to themselves, right? So it still goes back to me in a very honest space that think about my uncle when he was nearing his life and just sharing, right? He was just sharing deeply how he lived this and can't do this anymore. And it's like there's this he had a really personal reckoning with his end of life coming. And so I just really appreciate that in the space.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing to witness. It's like a shedding. There's no room to carry and no time to carry secrets and things that have been unsaid.
And there's no judgment, right? Because in that moment, if sitting there,
right,
it's how this person feels, right? Who am I to judge?
Right, and you get to do this.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So when it comes to your doula work, what do you find challenging? What challenges you the most personally?
Two things come into my mind when you ask the question. I've come, most of my life being in operations in the fixer, right? Fixer. This is not a place to fix anything.
This is not the fixing place. No.
This is not the fixing place. And really that was like when I took INELDA's training in 2018, I was like, crash. Okay. This was a moment that I really had to spend time with, right? And really understand that these are not my choices, right? And I'm here to accompany. So that I think always resurfaces, I think it's natural, right? I do some self-reflection, but what I'm reminded of, right, of that I believe being in this space and seeing individuals die and having conversations around death has made me a better parent or partner or made me want to live differently and travel more, do these things, right? Because as we all know, this is our one time coming through here, potentially for some of us believe that, right? And like, how do you still in that space. And so I'm always inspired after the death to be like, okay, I've got to book this trip and just do that. I've got to do this, right? But then what happens? The routine kicks back in, and then I'm like, okay, then I'm here, and I can't, right? So I'm still working on that piece, but I'm grateful to be reminded all the time that there is still time for me to do those things. And so when I forget, it's another reminder.
Yeah.
So that's where I work through.
Did you ever have a patient whose choices you did not agree with? And you're in the background going, that's not going to work out the way you think it is.
Somebody came to mind when you said that, and I was really, and I'll share the individual was a family member, which makes this even more complicated to provide this type of care. Right? This individual had a secret he wanted to tell me. And, and you sat me down and I was trying to be really present, I didn't want notes, and he was talking and he'd have a beer with me, have another beer with me. I'm like, okay. And we're talking and he said, and you do what you want with it, Dougie. And I was like,
oh, snap.
Yeah, snap, right. And then, well, you can tell your mother if you want. Well, it'd be very different if my mother wasn't my mother and I was providing care for somebody else. Because then if he said, "Oh, you can go tell my daughter-in-law, my sister-in-law," absolutely, it would be very different, right? So in that story didn't work out the way that they wanted. I honored their wishes by doing what I thought was right, but I had a big learning. I took a lot of that on, and after his death, I shared the secret because I thought that was right. But the response I got from his grandchildren was not what he had hoped.
Yeah.
Going back to your original question, right? He was sharing this information from a really loving place that he wanted his grandchildren to know these things. And then it didn't work out.
That was not the emotion that it elicited from them.
It didn't. It didn't.
Yeah.
And in the moment, I was very, very interested in honoring what he wanted. This is early on. This was 2019 after I trained, and in hindsight, I might have asked different questions to him or asked him to have that message. But this has been a learning, right? But it did resonate in my head at the time. That thing that goes off in your head or my stomach, like, is this?
Yeah,
okay?
the little red flag, and you're like, that's probably not the best choice.
I'm not sure. I'm definitely not telling my mother. I didn't tell her.
Well, he gave you the option. He gave you the option not to.
I told her the day of the funeral. So I told her the day of the funeral, but did not tell her before when he was still alive.
Well, and we learn from every patient, every client and family member that we work with. But when we're working with our own families, that's a different sort of learning curve. And I think you can't sit in that situation unbiased, for one thing.
100%.
Right? You can't be objective in that. So, yeah. But I think we've all done it. We've had patients that choose not to employ pain meds for whatever reason. It goes back to this concept of a good death. And the rule is we don't get to decide what a good death means for anybody but ourselves.
Agree.
Yeah. Which is really hard to do when you're a fixer.
But that is, all my edges of fixing have been worn down. They're rubbed down now.
Right. It's like a river rock. You get smoothed.
Yes.
The water eventually wears you down to where
Yeah.
So you understand you don't need to fix, you don't have to fix, and it's not your job to fix.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think I know with nurses, probably social workers too. Well, and chaplains. Yeah, I think everybody on the hospice team. We want to make it easier. We don't necessarily have to fix everything, but we definitely want to make it easier. And a lot of times we know how to make it easier. But the human fact of it is that we are coming into situations where people are dying, and they've lived an entire long life, and they've had all these relationships, however dysfunctional, before we even come into the picture. So it's definitely not our job to elicit any sort of big change.
Exactly. And Maria, my colleague had a client who felt he had done some wrong in his life and therefore opted not for pain medication because that was part of his
It's like a penance.
penance.
He needed to suffer. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, my colleague seeing him suffer, but it was his choice, right? It was
Right.
his,
It was
and that's
something he
hard.
desired. Yeah, that was his
Yeah.
version of a good death.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have seen that before too. And sometimes it's not about suffering. I've seen older men that have done that because it's a persona. They have felt strong and very masculine their whole lives without needing help for things. So they felt that having pain and receiving help for pain was a sign of weakness.
Weakness. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Interesting part of our work. So if you were talking to someone who was considering doula work, what did you call it? Death curious or doula
Death
curious?
curious, yeah.
Death curious. What guidance would you offer and what would you tell them?
I think it falls off of what we just talked about, right? I would certainly lean into what is calling you, your feeling, your emotion, because we know people come to our training death curious. They saw what they thought was a really good, beautiful death, and they want to continue that, or they experienced what they thought was a bad death for whatever reason they may, and they want to fix it, right? And so my advice is lean into what's driving you to provide care, because as we know, we have a dying population. We need more individuals being with people at end of life. But then you have to go into the self-awareness, right? That like the self-awareness of going back to like you cannot show up with an agenda, right? If you are, we've had people that are very religious that want to bring people to this person or bring somebody to this God or something, right? And then they're showing up with their agenda. And so how do you I'd say lean into what's motivating you, right? Because providing end-of-life care can be really rewarding. But then on the other side, have your own self-awareness to know that you're accompanying them and it's their choice. And then there might need to be a lot of work. When I did the pre-work for INELDA, they say, oh, it was 8 to 10 hours. I think I was 20 hours into it, journaling about my father and this and that. Because when I'm showing up, I need to know that the person that's dying is not my father, right? It's not my grandfather. And so that's the work. My guidance would be lean into the passion you're feeling or the calling you're feeling, but then take the time to do the self-awareness to know that this won't be you don't get to choose this stuff. You don't get to choose these people's final days and lives in their lives.
That's great advice. Great advice. Okay, so where can my listeners find INELDA and engage with the resources that you guys are offering?
Wonderful. We're at www.inelda.org. So our website. And when you come into our website, depending, what you're looking for, if you're the death curious person, I want to learn more about what a doula does, we have a section about that. If you're interested in taking the next step, we've got training, we have events on the website, we have our webinar events, we have all the resources I talked about earlier. We have additional resources. We have legacy resources. We have end-of-life planning resources. We have end-of-life guides or toolkits. We get a lot of times there are organizations starting out there, like personally they lost someone, didn't know all the things to do, like who do I go and get the death certificate. So we've got a page of resources and they're grouped together. There's resources about books, we've got podcasts in there, and so that would be a place to certainly start. You can follow us on social and on Instagram. We're at INELDA_doulas. And then certainly with any questions, we're at info@inelda.org, and we're here to answer any questions and navigate what this experience could look like, and certainly answer any questions for anybody.
Perfect. There's a huge number of resources on your website. It's amazing. You also have a newsletter that they can sign up for.
Yes.
Great stuff. Doug, thank you so much for being on the show with me. Is there one question I didn't ask you that you would have loved to answer?
You know, no, I have no regrets. No, I don't. There isn't one. There isn't one.
Oh, that's such a nice compliment to me as the host. That's so great. Thank you
Yeah, I
so
just
much.
feel like this is a wonderful journey, and thank you for letting me relive these stories and sharing. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.